Have you ever wondered how the open road can bring people closer? For Alex and Jake, two best friends and passionate bikers, the road was their escape, a place where adventure and brotherhood thrived. But one fateful journey, after an unexpected accident leaves them stranded, a night under the stars in a shared tent brings their friendship to a crossroads. What starts as a bond of trust transforms into something deeper, something neither of them expected. This is a story of discovery, love, and finding the courage to accept feelings you never thought you had. Join us as we follow Alex and Jake's journey, filled with roaring engines, unexpected emotions, and the adventure of a lifetime. If you enjoy heartfelt and intense stories about friendship and self-discovery, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another moving tale. Now, let's ride into the story. My biker best friend made me fall for him. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink as I zipped up my leather jacket and strapped on my helmet. My bike, a black and chrome Harley-Davidson, sat gleaming in the early morning light. This was it, another road trip, another adventure. And as always, my best friend Jake was right beside me, revving the engine of his classic Indian Scout. Jake had been my riding buddy for years. We'd met through a mutual friend at a biker meetup, and since then we were inseparable on the road. He was the loud one, always cracking jokes, while I tended to keep things more low-key. But somehow, we balanced each other out. "You ready for this, Alex?" Jake shouted over the rumble of his bike's engine. I grinned under my helmet and gave him a thumbs up. "Let's hit it!" We tore out of the driveway, the roar of our bikes echoing through the quiet streets. There was something magical about the open road, the way it stretched endlessly before us, promising freedom and adventure. No deadlines, no responsibilities, just the wind on your face and the hum of the engine beneath you. Our plan was to ride through the countryside, avoiding the highways and sticking to the scenic back roads. Jake had mapped out a route that would take us through winding mountain roads and along rivers, with plenty of stops for photos and food. By midday, we'd covered a good distance and stopped at a roadside diner for lunch. Jake was in his element, charming the waitress and making everyone in the room laugh with his over-the-top stories about our previous trips. I couldn't help but smile as I watched him. He had a way of drawing people in, his confidence and humor making him impossible to ignore. "What are you looking at, man?" he asked, catching me staring. "Just wondering how you're not tired from talking so much," I teased, shaking my head. "Hey, someone's got to keep the energy up." He shot back with a grin, throwing a fry at me. The day rolled on as we cruised through picturesque landscapes, the wind carrying the scent of pine trees and fresh air. It felt perfect, like nothing could go wrong. But as the sun began to set and we started climbing a steep, winding road, things took a turn. "Watch out!" Jake yelled, pointing ahead. I barely had time to react before my bike hit a patch of loose gravel. The back tire slipped, and before I knew it, I was skidding across the pavement. The world spun as I lost control, the sound of scraping metal and my own panicked breaths filling my ears. When I finally came to a stop, my bike lay on its side and my heart was racing. Jake was off his bike in seconds, rushing toward me. "Alex, are you okay?" he shouted, kneeling beside me. "I'm fine," I said, wincing as I tried to move. My shoulder ached, and I could feel a scrape on my arm, but nothing seemed broken. Jake let out a relieved sigh, but his face was still tense. "You scared the hell out of me, man." I managed a weak laugh. "Guess I'm not as good a rider as I thought." "Don't even joke about that," he said, his voice unusually serious. "Let's get you up." With his help, I stood, wincing at the pain in my shoulder. My bike was a mess, scratched, dented, and missing a side mirror. Jake inspected it, shaking his head. "It's not rideable tonight," he said. "What do we do now?" I asked, glancing around. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and mountains, with no sign of a town nearby. Jake pointed to the saddlebags on his bike. "I've got a tent and supplies. We'll camp here for the night, and I'll figure something out in the morning." I nodded, too tired and sore to argue. As Jake set up the tent and started a small fire, I couldn't help but feel grateful for him. He always had my back, no matter what. As the stars began to dot the night sky and the fire crackled between us, I realized how much I trusted him, more than anyone else in my life. And as he sat across from me, his face illuminated by the warm glow of the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was going to change everything. The night settled around us like a heavy blanket, the stillness of the wilderness broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the faint hum of crickets in the distance. Jake had finished setting up the tent and was now sitting across from me, poking at the fire with a stick. "You sure you're okay?" he asked for the 5th time, his eyes scanning me like he was searching for hidden injuries. "I'm fine, Jake," I replied, giving him a reassuring smile. "Just sore. I'll live." He nodded, though his jaw was tight with worry. "Man, you scared the hell out of me back there. When I saw you go down, I thought—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I'm fine," I said again, softer this time. "Really? And it's thanks to you?" Jake looked up, his dark eyes meeting mine across the fire. "You'd do the same for me," he said simply. The firelight danced on his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the scruffy stubble that always seemed to suit him. I'd seen Jake in 1,000 different lights, laughing at a bar, grinning after a win on the track, or focused and serious during a tough ride. But tonight, something felt different. There was an intensity in his gaze that made my chest tighten. "Do you ever think about how long we've been doing this?" Jake asked, suddenly, breaking the silence. I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "Riding," he said, gesturing to our bikes parked a few feet away. "Hitting the road, chasing sunsets. Feels like we've been doing it forever." I chuckled. "Yeah, it does. I can't imagine doing it with anyone else." Jake smirked, tossing his stick into the fire. "You'd be bored out of your mind without me." "Probably," I admitted, laughing. The conversation faded into a comfortable silence. I leaned back, resting on my elbows as I stared up at the stars. The night sky was vast and endless, the kind of view you could only get out here, far from the noise of the city. Jake lay back too, his shoulder brushing against mine as he stretched out beside me. The small contact sent a jolt through me, and I quickly pushed the thought away. This was Jake, my best friend, my riding partner. I couldn't let myself think like that. "You ever think about what you want to do? You know, when we're done with all this?" Jake asked, his voice softer now. I glanced at him, surprised by the question. "You mean when we're too old to ride?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. "Yeah, when the road stops calling." I thought about it for a moment. I guess I haven't. The road's been everything for so long, it's hard to imagine life without it. Jake turned his head to look at me, his gaze searching. "Same here. But I think if I had someone to share it with, it wouldn't be so bad." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to unpack. I felt his eyes on me, and when I turned to meet his gaze, the intensity there made my breath hitch. "Jake," I started, my voice faltering. "Alex," he said, his tone steady but low. "You ever feel like maybe there's more to this? To us?" The question hit me like a freight train, and for a moment I couldn't speak. My mind raced, every memory of our years together flashing before me, the laughs, the fights, The long rides in silence that felt more intimate than words ever could. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe." Jake didn't move, but the space between us felt charged, electric. His hand brushed against mine, a small tentative gesture that sent my heart racing. "Maybe's a good place to start," he said softly, his voice carrying a vulnerability I'd never heard before. The fire crackled between us, but all I could hear was Jake's words echoing in my mind. "Maybe's a good place to start." He was still lying next to me, his hand just barely brushing against mine, but it felt like the most significant touch I'd ever experienced. "Jake," I started, unsure of how to even begin to address what was happening between us. "Yeah?" he replied, his voice steady but softer than usual. "What are you saying?" I asked, my eyes searching his face for answers. He turned his head to look at me, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "I'm saying, I think there's more here than just riding and being friends. I've been feeling it for a while now, Alex, and I'm tired of pretending it's not there." My heart raced as his words sank in. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to make a joke and pretend this wasn't happening. But the other part, the part that had been drawn to him in ways I couldn't explain, knew he was right. I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake sat up slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. "But I need you to be honest with me, Alex. Do you feel it too?" I looked away, my chest tightening as I tried to sort through the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Did I feel it? The truth was, I'd felt something for Jake for longer than I cared to admit. I just hadn't allowed myself to name it. "I think I do," I said finally, my voice trembling. Jake let out a small, relieved laugh, and the sound sent a warmth through me I didn't expect. "That's all I needed to hear," he said, his hand fully covering mine now. The contact was simple, yet it felt like 1,000 unspoken words passed between us in that moment. My breath caught as he leaned closer, his face mere inches from mine. "Tell me to stop, and I will," he said, his voice low and steady. I didn't say anything. Instead, I closed the gap between us, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that felt like crossing a line I never thought I would. It was soft at first, hesitant, but as Jake responded, it deepened into something more, something that felt as inevitable as the open road we loved so much. When we finally pulled apart, I searched his face for any hint of regret, but all I saw was a mixture of relief and happiness. "Guess we just changed the rules, huh?" I said, trying to lighten the moment, though my voice was shaky. Jake grinned, his confidence returning. "Yeah, but I think we can handle it." We spent the rest of the night talking, our usual walls down as we shared things we'd never dared to say before. By the time the fire died down and the stars began to fade, I realized that this trip had already changed my life in ways I never expected. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden streaks across the fabric of the tent. I blinked awake, disoriented for a moment, before I felt the warmth of someone lying beside me. Turning my head, I saw Jake, his face relaxed in sleep, his dark hair a mess against the pillow of his arm. The events of the night before came rushing back. The kiss, the words we'd shared, the way he'd held me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. A mix of emotions surged through me. Excitement, fear, and something I couldn't quite name but knew was important. Jake stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw me looking at him, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, feeling a little awkward under his gaze. For a moment, we just lay there, the silence between us comfortable but charged with unspoken questions. Finally, Jake sat up, running a hand through his hair. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes searching. "I don't know," I admitted, sitting up as well. It's a lot to take in." Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that. But I meant about your shoulder," he added with a smirk, lightening the mood. I laughed, shaking my head. "You're impossible." "And you love it," he shot back, his grin widening. The truth of his words hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. I didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the thought was there, hovering just below the surface. We packed up the tent and got ready to hit the road. Jake's bike was still in perfect condition, while mine was scratched and bent, but Jake had a plan. "We'll ride together," he said, strapping my saddlebags to his bike. "You can hop on the back with me." I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because the idea of sitting so close to him after everything that had happened made my chest tighten. But there wasn't much choice. "All right," I said, climbing onto the bike behind him. "Hold on tight," Jake said, throwing a grin over his shoulder. As the engine roared to life and we pulled onto the road, I wrapped my arms around his waist, the warmth of his body against mine both comforting and unnerving. The ride was smoother than I expected, the rhythm of the road calming my nerves. We stopped at a gas station a few hours later to refuel and grab some food. As we sat at a picnic table outside, Jake looked at me, his expression serious. "Listen, Alex," he began. "Last night, I don't want you to think I'm expecting anything. I care about you. A lot. And I don't want to screw this up." His honesty caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Finally, I took a deep breath and met his gaze. "I care about you too, Jake. And I don't know where this is going, but I want to figure it out. With you." A slow smile spread across his face, and the tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. "Good," he said simply. As we hit the road again, the weight I'd been carrying for so long seemed to lift. The world felt different, brighter somehow, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The miles blurred together as Jake and I rode through the countryside, the hum of the engine beneath us and the wind in our faces providing a comforting rhythm. But even as I held on to him, my arms wrapped securely around his waist, my mind churned with questions. What would happen when the trip was over? Could we really go back to the way things were, or had everything already changed for good? We pulled into a small roadside diner just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Jake parked his bike and I climbed off, stretching my sore legs. He shot me a grin. "You're getting used to riding on the back, huh?" I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. "Don't get used to it." The diner was quiet, the kind of place where the waitress knew everyone by name. Jake ordered for both of us, and as we waited for our food, I couldn't help but notice the way his confidence seemed effortless, like he belonged wherever he went. "You've always been like this, haven't you?" I asked, leaning back in the booth. "Like what?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Like, you're not afraid of anything," I said. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "You think I'm not afraid? Alex, I'm terrified most of the time." "Of what?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Of this," he said, his voice softening. "Of us. Of screwing things up. But I've learned something over the years. Being afraid doesn't mean you don't do it anyway." His words hit me hard, and I found myself looking away, unsure of how to respond. Jake reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere, Alex. We'll figure this out together." The way he said it, so calm and certain, made the weight in my chest feel a little lighter. "I'm just not used to this," I admitted. He smiled, his hand giving mine a reassuring squeeze. "Neither am I. But maybe that's what makes it worth it." We finished our meal and hit the road again, the quiet between us feeling more like comfort than awkwardness. The night stretched on, the road illuminated by the glow of the bike's headlights. For the first time in years, I wasn't just riding to escape something. I was riding toward something. When we finally stopped for the night at a small motel, Jake tossed me a set of keys. "One room okay?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes watching me closely. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, that's fine." The room was simple, with 2 beds pushed against opposite walls and a small TV mounted on the dresser. Jake flopped onto one of the beds, kicking off his boots. "You look like your brain's still going 100 miles an hour," he said, smirking. "Can you blame me?" I shot back, sitting on the edge of the other bed. "No," he said, his tone softening. "But you don't have to overthink everything, Alex. Just be here. With me." I looked at him, the way he was leaning back, his arms crossed behind his head, completely at ease. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to stop thinking and just feel. I stood and crossed the small space between us, sitting on the edge of his bed. Jake tilted his head, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "You," I said simply. Before I could lose my nerve, I leaned in, pressing my lips to his. The kiss was different this time, slower, more deliberate, as if we were both finally letting ourselves accept what had been building between us for so long. When we finally pulled apart, Jake smiled, his hand brushing against my cheek. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Not when you make it this easy." The morning light poured into the room as I opened my eyes, finding Jake sitting at the edge of the bed, lacing up his boots. He glanced back at me, a small smile playing on his lips. "You ready to hit the road?" I nodded, stretching as I got up. "Yeah. Let's see where it takes us." Jake stood, slinging his jacket over his shoulder, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No words were needed. Everything had changed, but somehow it felt right. "Come on, slowpoke," Jake said with a grin, walking toward the door. I laughed, grabbing my helmet. "Right behind you." As we stepped outside, the cool morning air hit us, and the sound of our bikes roaring to life filled the quiet street. For the first time, I wasn't just riding to escape. I was riding toward something real. Love has a way of finding us in the most unexpected places, even on the open road. Alex and Jake's story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones we never planned for. What would you do if you found love where you least expected it? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of passion, discovery, and courage. Thank you for riding with us. Until next time.